I'm going to teach them about stress physiology. Because I was like, what do I have in common with rich people and students? Stress. That's what we have in common. That's pretty much all I could think of. I was like, oh, yeah, that's it. Okay, so this is where we were last time, right? We were talking about the organization scheme, okay? And you already had most of this written last time, right? So remember mesenchyme. So wait, before I do that. Why are such diverse tissues as blood, bone, and fat categorized all as connective tissues? Yeah, because they all come from mesenchyme, right? So when you're an adult, it doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense that they are categorized together, but if you trace it back, you can see the logic behind it. So they all come from the same tissue, which is mesenchyme. You don't have any mesenchyme left as an adult, any of the tissue, but what you do have left as an adult, and by the way, this is what mesenchyme looks like. I never asked this slide because it doesn't look like anything really. The only thing it does is like, it definitely doesn't look like epithelial tissue, right? Okay, and it suggests that it's connective tissue because it's got widely scattered cells, but other than that, it's just like kind of impossible to identify anything characteristic about it. So you don't have any of this left as an adult. This tissue is what we call multipotent, which means that it can make a bunch of different types of tissues. And you don't have any of that left as an adult, but you do have some of the cells left as an adult. And those cells are called mesenchymal cells. They usually hang out around your blood vessels. And what they are good for is if I get damage and I'm having trouble with repair, these remember how to make all of your connective tissues, right? So that's why even though tissues like cartilage hardly repair well at all, they do have the possibility for a little bit of repair because of mesenchyme. Does that make sense? Mesenchymal cells, okay? So these will be in play most of the rest of the semester. We will revisit them. We will see instances in which they help with repair. So those are the mesenchymal cells. Okay, so now, we were right here. Yeah, so the embryonic connective tissue, which is mesenchyme. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the basic organization of a connective tissue, and then we'll start looking at the specific ones. The basic organization of a connective tissue you can sort of see in this figure. It's not just cells, it's also the stuff between cells, right? And the stuff between cells collectively is called extracellular matrix. You guys with me? An extracellular matrix has the stuff that is not fibers, called ground substance, and then the fibers. Okay, so what is ground substance? Anything it wants to be, really. All I'm telling you is that the tissue has cells and fibers in it usually, and it's got something else in it. And the something else, if you are blood, could be mostly water, right? But if you are bone, it's going to be mostly calcium crystals, okay? And if you're connective tissue proper, it's probably going to have like more water than bone does, but less than blood does. So what I'm telling you is the term ground substance doesn't mean anything specific unless you talk about a specific tissue, right? Okay, but it's not empty. That's what I'm saying. There is something there, okay? All right, so now let's talk about the cells. Okay, so when you look at any connective tissues, the cells that you can encounter, a lot of times there's more than one kind of cell in there, but most of them will have the suffix either blast, site, or clast, okay? And that's actually telling you something about the tissue too. If I have a cell that I label as an osteoblast, then it's probably going to make what? Bone or bone matrix or something about bone, right? What if I have a cell that I label as a fibroblast? It's going to make fibers. So with that in mind, it shouldn't surprise you that this tissue right here is basically just a big fiber party. Most of the cells are called fibroblasts, right? That makes sense? Okay, so blast is a really common ending, and the most common is really site. So a site cell is just more mature cell. It's less likely to do cell division. It's not unlikely, but it's just less likely, less active in like making stuff and more like just maintaining stuff. So in bone, it would be called a what? Osteocyte, and in fat, it would be called a adipocyte, right? That makes sense? And cartilage? Chondrocyte, exactly. So you're going to run into tons of site cells. They're not uncommon at all. And then the last type of cell you actually won't run into in the histology chapter, but we'll run into it in the next one. So I'm going to go ahead and tell you that you can also run into clasped cells. And clasped cells are cells that don't build the tissue, they actually break down the tissue. And conceptually, initially, it might be hard to understand why the hell would you want to break down the tissue? Well, because remember that when you want to change the shape of something, when you want to remodel your house, what do you do before you do the construction? You do the destruction. Exactly, right? So you're going to need to break things down before you're going to build them up differently. For instance, when you start working out, your bones actually change, right? And they change in some areas in which they get deeper pockets for muscle attachment, and sometimes they get higher. So you are going to do some blast and clast activity on that tissue. That's why the very best skeleton that I've ever studied in my entire life was a bodybuilder skeleton. It's like all that stuff that you like have to squint to see on a regular skeleton, it's like completely obvious because all of the projections are huge and all of the depressions are enormous. So you guys start working out and then give me your body, okay? That's not creepy at all, is it? No? Start working. I mean, like after you're dead, you can like totally keep it for as long as you want. Okay, and then, by the way, there are other cells that wander into connective tissue, and those cells, let me show you which ones. Those cells, like adipocytes, wander into tissue that is not adipose. I'll talk about adipose today. And white blood cells. This is a big white blood cell that wandered into a tissue. It's called a macrophage. So why would you want white blood cells to wander into connective tissue? Well, connective tissue is between things, right? It's like between my skin and my muscle. There's no room for white blood cells in my skin, so doesn't this seem like kind of a good natural place to put some white blood cells, right? Or how about the tissue that is immediately in deep to the epithelium lining your digestive tract? Doesn't that seem like a really good place to put some sentries? Shouldn't be absorbing all kinds of stuff. So you see white blood cells wander into and live in connective tissue quite often. Okay, so now, what about the matrix? The matrix is the ground substance plus the protein fibers. And the ground substance is whatever the heck it wants to be, depending on the tissue. It's usually got some protein, not fibrous proteins, but other kinds of proteins in it, and also some sugars, and it varies dramatically between tissues. But it is not empty. Varying degrees of water, as I mentioned, mostly water, intermediate, and very little water in it between the three. And then now let's talk about the protein fibers. And the protein fibers vary dramatically in both type of fiber, orientation of the fiber, and also how many fibers there are. So what type, how many, and how are they oriented. So, and that, again, when you look at a histology slide, if you are not rote memorizing it, you should be able to look at it and figure out that, for instance, in this tissue, all of the fibers are running this direction. Do you see? That means something about the strength of the tissue. If I pulled on the tissue from the ends, which way would it be strong? This direction, not that direction, right? So the orientation, the types of fibers, all of that should start to speak to you and tell you something that is not rote memorization. That's what we're going for here. So let's talk about the types of fibers. So there are 3 general types of fibers. These are collagen fibers. They usually, but not always, stain pink. Not always. They are thicker than the other 2 types of fibers. They don't usually branch at all. So let's look at them in an actual histology slide. So here is a collagen fiber, right? Okay, they're thick, they're quite often bubblegum pink, and they don't branch. So what are those fibers? Those fibers are, if you imagine a rope is made of individual fibers, right? One of the individual rope fibers is not very strong, but collectively they can get really strong, right? And so you can weave them all parallel and then they're only strong this direction, or you can make a net out of them, right? And they can be strong that direction, right? Same thing with collagen fibers. So they are not stretchy, okay? But they are very strong and they get stronger and stronger as you bundle them, Okay, so this tissue compared to, just look at this one, compared to this tissue, you can probably see that this one, which is basically bundles of collagen, would be way stronger, right? Does that make sense? Okay, so collagen is the most abundant protein in your body. Of the 30,000 proteins that you have, 30,000 approximately different kinds of proteins, 25 to 46% of those proteins is collagen. So it's by far the most abundant protein in your body. And it is holding you up like a rope in all of these places. So anytime you are resisting gravity, you are using something to sort of hold you up. And so it shouldn't surprise you that bone has collagen, cartilage has collagen, ligaments and tendons have collagen, and they're all sort of strength and resisting gravity. And of course, collagen is what starts to betray you as you age. So collagen starts to break down with sort of the incessant pull of gravity, right? Always the same direction. And then your collagen starts to break down in your skin and you start to get wrinkles, right? Starts to break down here and everything starts to head south. Same thing down below, dudes. Don't think we don't notice. Everything starts to head south and it's just inevitable unless you want to stand on your head or move to a different planet or something. I don't know. Probably wouldn't even make any difference. So it can occur in bundles, and we're going to run into collagen in most of the tissues. You're going to run into it in most of the connective tissues, I should say. Elastic fibers are made of the protein elastin, and if you imagine collagen as a rope fiber, imagine these as one of those little rubber bands that you use on your braces. Teeny tiny, right? And they're super springy and they're flexible. Individually, they're not very strong at all. Here's what they look like. They usually stain much darker, okay? And often they will branch. Now, note to self, do not get dependent on colors when you're doing histology slides. Colors are used secondarily. You really need to know what the tissue looks like because there are different staining techniques that you can use for different tissues. So don't, for instance, memorize that cardiac muscle is always gray and white. There's one stain that's gray and white. There's also some that are pink, right? So with these fibers usually stain darker. So let's look at them in an actual histology slide. Do you see this one? Okay, so they're usually blue, dark blue, purple, or black, or something like that. Now, can they get strong? If you use 250 rubber bands all together, doesn't that also get you strength? So you can get strength and elasticity. For instance, this tissue right here has all elastic fibers running parallel to one another. So if I pull on it this way, can you see that it would have both strength and elasticity? Yeah, it would. Okay, so they are elastic fibers. And then the last fiber is really present quite often, but it's really difficult to see. And these are called reticular fibers. So in order to make a reticular fiber, I want you to imagine not a rope fiber and not a rubber band, but a hairnet. Okay, and imagine that the way that I made the hairnet is that I took one of those individual rope fibers and I pulled it apart even further. Right? So these are actually made of a different subcomponent of collagen. They're related to collagen. And they're really not good for a lot of strength, but they're good for what a hairnet is for. You like put them over and they can hold soft structures kind of loosely, right? Or the internal framework of soft squishy organs like the liver and the spleen. That's a reticular fiber. That makes sense? Now, they are present in a lot of tissues, but the only tissue you can label them in is this guy right here. That looks like a hairnet, doesn't it? What tissue is this? That is reticular connective tissue, exactly. Yeah. So they're present in a lot of tissues, but they only stain in this one because it's really difficult to get that teeny tiny fiber to stain. Go ahead.
In the last pink slide that you were on with the elastic fibers.
This one?
Yeah. How can you tell the difference between the collagens and the elastic?
Oh, collagen is thick and bubblegum pink. Okay. And the elastic fibers are thin and much darker.
Oh, okay.
Do you see the difference? Okay. All right. And you can't see reticular in that slide, even though it's present in that slide. Everybody good? Okay, so now with that in mind, let's start looking at these tissues. And so you can see that you're going to have, this is going to be hardest because you've got 6 different ones here, right? Okay. This will be super easy because you've got one single slide there. And then the cartilage will be sort of the second most difficult. You actually do have two different kinds of bone, but for some reason they only teach the first one in the histology chapter. So I'll just stick with what they're doing and you'll learn the other one when we do bone. Okay, so remember that when you start to look at connective tissue proper, it's not solid and it's not fluid, it's somewhere in between, it's kind of squishy, right? And then it's subdivided into loose versus dense, okay? By what? What's the subdivision? Verbalize it. I know you know it visually, but what is it? It's not the ground substance, it's the what? So you want to describe to a blind person the difference between loose and dense connective tissue.
The amount of fibers.
Exactly, it's the amount of fibers in the matrix, right? How densely packed the fibers are in the matrix. So we are going to have 3 loose and then 3 dense. Okay, so with the 3 loose connective tissues, we've already been looking at the first one. This is called loose areolar connective tissue. You need to know this one because it's the easiest one to write questions off, because I can see both collagen and elastic. I can also see space where I could label ground substance, right? I can also ask whether it's loose versus dense. I can also ask whether it's proper supporting of fluid, right? So you want to make sure that you know that one pretty darn well. It's also one of the most common connective tissues in the body, so it's good to know that one too. Okay, so let's talk about this one. This tissue, contains all 3 types of fibers. You can't see reticular in there, but it's in there. And they're all relatively loosely arranged, so you end up with some space in there. And it goes here, loose areolar. This means space, loose areolar connective tissue. Okay, so you should be able to label collagen and elastic. And if you want to know what this tissue is like, you have easy access to it, because all you have to do to feel what this tissue is like is pinch your arm, pull up, and you've got a little give between your skin and your muscle. That should be connective tissue right there, right? Between skin and muscle? It is. That's loose areolar connective tissue right there. And it's got a little bit of give. It's also got a little bit of snapback, more when you're super young. Have you ever like pinched the skin of like an 85-year-old person? It like stays up there for half an hour before it goes right down, okay? That tissue, soft, pliable, you can pinch your arm. Or if you've ever skinned anything, whether it's deer or a fish or a chicken or a human, which I have, although for some reason people don't like to hear about that at parties. I've never figured out why. And I'm like, all you have to do to make friends is swear and talk about skinning people, right? And I have 2 friends. They're both really good friends and they think I'm hilarious. Okay, so if you've ever skinned anything and you get between the skin and the muscle and you pull up, you can actually kind of see the little silvery fibers popping. Do you know what I'm talking about? Can you visualize it, like skin in a chicken or skin in a fish, and even a fish? That's this tissue that's actually letting go between the skin and the muscle, loose areolar connective tissue. You can see the fibers. So go home and skin something. Tell your mom you're going to help cook, right? I'm like, help cook. Do you have any chicken to skin? And she'll be like, what the hell is wrong with you? You've literally never offered to help cook dinner before, ever. Okay, so this tissue is pretty much the glue of the human body. If you have 2 tissues and you need to put something between it, this is the most likely one to guess. It is under almost all of your epithelia, not just here, but also under the epithelium internally. It's like around your blood vessels, around your muscles. It's just all over the place. You're just going to run into it all over the place. It is the one that you should really know the best. And I hate to tell you, but this is true. Later on, when we run into it again within different body systems, they decided to rename it for you. I don't know why they did it. I hate it. So the best I can do for you is to remind you when you see the word lamina propria that you actually do know that tissue, and it was called loose areolar before. So sometimes the anatomists just don't get it together about naming things between body systems. And the best you can do is know what they're doing, right? Not why they did it, because I have no idea. So I won't ask you this one now, but when we run into it later, I will remind you that you've heard it before. Okay, so that is loose areolar connective tissue. You can see lots of labeling in here. As far as the cells go, what kind of cells are in loose areolar connective tissue? Tons of them. mostly fibroblast cells, but they're also likely to have adipocytes in it and some white blood cells wandering in there and some mesenchymal cells. So what do you call them? Well, your textbook just lied and said that they were all fibroblasts. But they're not all fibroblasts because that's an obviously different kind of cell, right? Okay. You can call them all fibroblasts if you want, or you can not lie and just say that they are interstitial cells, which means cells that I can't identify in the interstitial fluid. Either one is fine. Fibroblasts are most abundant, but that's not all that's there. And there's a different thing right here, right? And here's a white blood cell right there. So the cells you can call fibroblasts are interstitial cells. Okay, so now let's move to adipose. Everybody cool with this one? Okay, there are a million different ways that that tissue looks. I'll show you a couple other pictures before we actually leave it. Does this look like areolar connective tissue? Yeah, you can start getting used to looking at it. It's a little harder to label when it's far away. How about this one? Yeah, so you start getting used to the look, right? I'll choose the best histology image I can choose, but I never choose the one out of the textbook because I always, always, always want you to give yourself a little bit more exposure, right? If only that I choose the one that I used in the lab, right? At least I know that you've looked at it more than one place, which is the only real way you can get good at this anyway. Okay, so now we're going to move to adipose tissue, okay? And adipose tissue is also a loose connective tissue, but it's weird looking. Okay, so adipose. So what adipose usually looks like is this down here. That's how you're usually going to see it, not like that, okay? That's super duper close up. Or let me show you a couple of other looks of adipose tissue from different slides. So do you see that one? To me, it looks like chicken wire. You know, it's kind of just what it looks like. Okay, so the question is, how is this tissue a loose connective tissue? Because you're actually not even seeing any fibers. So the reason adipose is a loose connective tissue comes from how it develops. So how you get adipose is really, you start with loose areolar connective tissue, and then you get fat. And when you get fat, you go through a lot of cell division with these adipocytes. And what happens is the adipocytes end up pushing everything else in the tissue between them. So does this tissue have all of these fibers in it and the other types of cells in it? Yeah, but it's impossible to label them because here's what happens. Adipose, as the adipocytes start going through cell division, what you're going to do is you're going to have one. Describe what it's doing in just a second. And all the stuff that was in the tissue before you got fat is smashed between all of these little cells and all of that kind of stuff. So when you're looking at it, mostly you see what is just adipocytes. And if you really could get up close, you could probably see that there was stuff smashed between it. But that's not usually how you look at it. You usually look at it like that. So why does it look so empty? The reason it looks so empty is because lipids don't stain very well with the techniques that you use to stain other things. And since mostly what the cell is full of lipids, so I've got an adipocyte. The nuclei generally get pushed way up against the side. I'll show you. Here's one nucleus. You see it? Pushed way up against the side right there. Okay, so the nucleus gets pushed up against the side, which means that what you're actually looking at is the cell is really pretty much full of what we call a lipid vacuole, okay, that doesn't stain. Okay, it doesn't stain at all. So what you end up is the cytoplasm and the nucleus get pushed up against the side. So when you have a whole slide full of these, they end up looking like chicken wire. Does that make sense? So is it still a loose connective tissue? Yeah, it is. Does it still have collagen and elastic and reticular fibers? It does. That's why it's categorized like that. It's just mostly now filled up with adipocytes. Does that make sense? Okay, so this one is not very hard. So what is the cell called? Adipocyte, right? And the thing that you're seeing most of is a lipid vacuole. They describe these adipocytes, if you look at them, they have what you call a signet ring shape. And if you think a signet ring is like a high school ring, and where it's all skinny on one side except for the little lump that has the stone on it. And that's what these kind of look like from the side. All skinny except one little lump inside. So that's adipose and an adipocyte. It is a loose connective tissue, although it doesn't look like one. So briefly, let's just talk about fat. Okay, adipose is very, very vascular, has very little visible matrix just because it gets squashed between things. If you've ever seen anybody undergo liposuction on TV, super bloody. It's like a really, really vascular tissue. One of the tragedies about adipose is that when you lay it down like subcutaneously under your skin, it doesn't tend to lay down very smoothly. Where the hell is that picture? There it is. It doesn't tend to lay down very smoothly. It lays down in little lumps called lobules. Okay, so the more lumps or lobules you get under your skin, especially if your skin is relatively thin, your skin will start to follow, right? And what do you call that? You call that cellulite, exactly. And you don't have to be fat to get cellulite. There's lots of skinny people with lots of cellulite. It is hormonally influenced too. You're a little more likely to get it if you're a female. You're also a little less likely to see it if you're a male because they got hair all over all parts, and like we tend to shave it off. You could just let the hair grow and then people wouldn't see the cellulite. You could do that. Just figure out what's important, right? Okay, so that is cellulite and lobules. So what's this all about? Of course, fat is insulating, it's also cushioning, and it's a major, major energy reserve. You find it under your skin, but you also find it like behind your eyeball, around organs like the kidneys and the heart, and you've got it a bunch of different places. So what it's actually trying to do is it's a major energy reserve, and you can see how it was good for the survival of the species, or all mammalian species. When you did not have rich, easy access to nutrients, then whenever you did, you would store them, right? But now in this westernized society, in this room, all of us are at least privileged enough to go to college, right? So it's not really likely that any of us are going to starve over the winter, right? So we are storing up for the long, hard winter that never comes now. So we have easy access to nutrients now, and so it's way, way, way easier to gain it and not lose it. Gain it and not lose it. So I have a little bit of news for you about adipose. One of the terribly tragic things about adipose is that you can always motivate your adipocytes to go through cell division, always. Anytime you're taking in more nutrients and need more storage vesicles, you're going to motivate them to go through cell division. But the tragedy about it is that you never get rid of them once they go through cell division. You can empty them out as you lose weight, right? But they're just waiting there. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever had any trouble or even just wanted to lose a few pounds. It's way easier to get fat the second time. It's like almost instant. You just stop paying attention for half an hour and you're like, damn, what the hell? And you literally have to work for 6 weeks to take the same amount off. It's because it's really, really easy to fill them up. You don't have to go through cell division anymore. You can just fill them up instantaneously. And your body will always make more for you. That's really generous, right? Thanks, I appreciate that. So it'll always make more and you can't get rid of them except for one thing. What's the only way you can get rid of them? Liposuction. Liposuction is a dicey proposition though. One of the things that happens with liposuction, my best friend had liposuction just recently, and I told her I was going to tell the story because I like to make fun of her. So she had liposuction, she was trying to get rid of these. So she had liposuction right here, and then so after you have liposuction, you pretty much have to be on a diet for the rest of your damn life because then you're going to start to gain weight and you don't have the cells here, but she had them right here, right? So now when she started gaining weight, instead of getting butt fat down here, she got upper butt fat. I'm like, that's totally worse. So it just tends to change your body fat composition unless you're going to be really, really rigid about what you do in the future. So yeah. There's also this little hormone right here, one last little tidbit about, they figured this hormone out, I think maybe 10 years ago. You may not have heard of it, but leptin is a hormone that is released from your digestive tract to communicate with your brain, to tell you when you're full, okay? But if you dump something in the digestive tract, do you think it gets there instantaneously to your brain? So what do you predict about weight gain in people who eat really quickly versus eat really slowly? Yes, people who eat fast gain weight, and one of the reasons is that your leptin doesn't get to your brain to tell you that you're satiated, so you should stop eating. So if you shove it in your face hole as quickly as possible, you're more likely to consume more calories, right? And sometimes that's useful, like on Thanksgiving, when they make the mashed potatoes that you like and they only make them once a year because they're completely sinful. You just like shove them really fast because you're like, I'm going to be full in a minute. It's going to be so sad. And I won't be able to eat anymore. And also the rest of the family will eat them too, buggers. Okay, so that's sort of your adipose tissue. And so now you've got this figure and you understand why it's a loose connective tissue. And then the last of the loose connective tissues is pretty easy. It is reticular loose connective tissue. By looking at it, I hope by now that you could very easily tell it's a loose connective tissue, right? And it is, to me, the one that looks most like a hairnet, even more than areolar connective tissue. So this tissue is inside your soft, squishy organs as a really soft framework, like your spleen and your liver. So you basically got an internal sort of hairnet that you can like space things out between. So it's not like there's no internal structure in squishy organs. It's just like it's a very pliable internal and external structure. So that's reticular connective tissue. So that one goes here.
Are those reticular fibers?
Yes, they are reticular fibers. Good question. The only fibers visible in this tissue, not the only ones present, but the only ones they stain for in this tissue are reticular fibers. So the reticular connective tissue, right?
So you usually can't see reticular fibers in others.
Yeah, they have to use a special staining technique to make them show up in this tissue. And in the other tissues, if they use that staining technique, you wouldn't see much else. So with this one, you're just specifically trying to stain to show the reticular fibers. Good? Okay, so the only one that you would actually have to be able to label reticular fibers in is this one. Okay? All right, so, and then we'll move on to the dense tissues. And the dense tissues are dense for a reason. All I have to do is show you 3 dense connective tissues and you will see. Obviously dense, okay? This is the figure your textbook uses. I hate that figure. I'll show you a better figure of that one. This is dense, irregular. And this one is also dense. So just by looking at them, I'm hoping you get the confidence to say, okay, that's probably a dense tissue, and it is. So there are 3 dense tissues. Let's look at the first one. This is dense, regular connective tissue. So you can tell it's dense. Do you see why it's called regular? Because the fibers are very regular. They're all parallel to one another. It does not look like a mess, right? So this is dense, regular connective tissue, okay? And so this tissue is phenomenal as long as you pull on it this direction, right? If you pull on it this direction, it's not. This is the tissue you use for ligaments and tendons. It doesn't tend to be very vascular. There's not as much room in it for blood vessels. And that means something about its healing, right? If you're not a very vascular tissue and you're thick, what do you think about your predictions for healing? You don't heal as quickly. Sometimes you don't heal as completely either, okay? So ligaments, tendons, and then a big flat sheet of tendon, like you have on top of your head, connecting this muscle to this muscle, is called an aponeurosis, and that's in your notes already. So ligaments, tendons, and aponeuroses. And this tissue is not at all stretchy, okay? Theoretically, like you can understand why some people say, well, why don't you want it to be stretchy? Because it would be less likely to be damaged if it was stretchy. Like the ligaments in your knee are not that hard to damage. The reason you don't want it to be stretchy is because I want you to think about a tendon's function. So if I've got a tendon here that connects my biceps brachii to my forearm, you'll learn the specific locations later, then if I contract the biceps brachii and the tendon is stretchy, can you see that that would force a lag time? If you had a rubber band there instead of a rope, then you would have a lag time between muscle contraction and the actual response. So they need to be strong and they can't be stretchy, which is all well and good as long as you don't hit them from a side that they didn't expect to be hit from. And then you can have problems. So this is dense regular connective tissue. And then dense irregular connective tissue Instead of taking all the fibers and running them the same direction, you run bundles of fibers different directions. But like I said, I hate that picture because it just looks like a mess. I love this one. It's the prettiest picture of dense irregular that I've ever seen, because you can see longitudinal sections of that collagen bundle and also cross sections of collagen bundles. So you can see that with this figure, what you're going to get is you're going to get a tissue that's strong in a bunch of different directions. And so you're going to use sheets of it instead of ropes of it. Makes sense? And you can pull on them from any direction you want, and they should be okay. So classic locations that you're going to run into this one is if you do another thing with your arm, instead of pulling up, because that's loose areolar, try to stretch it while pushing down. You can see that you're actually not getting very much give below the actual skin. That's the dermis. It's just under the epidermis. The dermis is mostly made of dense, irregular connective tissue, and it's strong in a bunch of different directions. If that doesn't make sense to you, I can tell you that you probably know the dermis because you're probably wearing the dermis of another mammal if you're wearing leather shoes. Grody, huh? So what they do to make leather is they take and stretch and moisturize and stretch and moisturize and keep flexible the dermis of usually another mammal, because you have that strength in a bunch of different directions in addition to flexibility. Super grody, right? And don't do it with people, please. Although people have before. Go ahead.
So why isn't your like right here made out of that so that it doesn't break?
Why isn't what?
Like how you said that this was made out of the regular connective tissue.
Dense regular. No, it's the tendon that's made out of dense regular.
Oh,
Because
so
I
it's
need a rope, I don't need a sheet.
Oh,
Okay, so basically your muscles here kind of end in points, and I need this rope to actually pull on a specific location. That makes sense? Okay, you also find this tissue on the outside of like your bones. On the outside of your bones, you're going to yank on them from a bunch of different directions. So the periosteum on the outside of bone is made of this, as is the perichondrium on the outside of cartilage. Good? Okay, so that's dense irregular. By the way, in dense regular and dense irregular, the most likely cell you're going to run into is a fibroblast, and that shouldn't surprise you. Right? The cells are generally called fibroblasts in both of them. In connective tissue, you're going to have to know what the cells are called in each of the tissues. Most of the time, it's relatively obvious. Sometimes you have to actually look it up. Okay, so that's dense irregular. And then last but not least is elastic dense. And the elastic dense connective tissue is going to start right here. Okay, elastic dense connective tissue is made mostly of elastic fibers. As a matter of fact, the only ones that you can see are elastic fibers. And so look at this tissue and see if, given your knowledge right now, you would guess that it was dense instead of loose, probably. And what would you guess those fibers were? Elastic. They stain much darker, right? Okay, and the fibers are all running parallel to one another, so you're going to get strength in this tissue. How? Which directions? On top, exactly. So basically what it kind of is it makes a stretchy ligament. Every once in a while you need a stretchy ligament like your vocal cords. Those are made of elastic, dense connective tissue. Does that make sense? Okay, or I know your textbook uses this one, this little ligament between your aorta and the pulmonary trunk, but that doesn't really make a whole hell of a lot of sense. So the ones that make sense are vocal cords, and then also between your vertebrae. Your vertebrae have ligaments between them, bone to bone, right? But those actually need to be a little bit more stretchy than the rest of them in your body, because there's all different planes of movement that you're going to be dealing with there. So you actually have elastic ligaments between your vertebrae. They're called your intervertebral ligaments. Does that make sense? Okay, so elastic dense is the last one. Now, in this figure, they label the fibroblast nucleus. I would never make you label a cell in there because it just looks like a big frickin' mess to me. Now, you should be able to see fibers, right? But the cells are the same color as the fibers, so it's really hard to tell anything. It's like kind of arbitrary. Oh, that's a fibroblast nucleus, but that's definitely not. Oh, no. So I don't really see anything distinguishable as a cell, and when I do, it should, I mean, if I was going to ask you to do a cell, you should be able to see the cell. Okay? All right. So the next tissues that we're going to be running into are cartilage. There's going to be 3 types of cartilage. but they're not hard. I just want you to sort of get used to looking at cartilage so that before you start worrying about whether it's a different kind of cartilage, you can always just sort of say, that's a cartilage, that's a cartilage, that's a cartilage. Because the cartilages, there's 3 of them, and they all have some things in common. The most important or easily recognizable for me thing that they have in common is that the cells almost always look like they have a bright border around them. Okay? So we'll talk about, that's actually a lacuna. But look between these 3 tissues. Do you see the bright border around the cells, kind of setting them apart? Do you see it here as well? Yeah, the bright border around the cells. And this one's got a little fluid in it, but can you still see that there's kind of a bright border around the cells? Okay, so now look at these cartilages. How about here? This, I would never ask you off of this slide, but can you start to see the suggestion of like a frame around the cartilages? Okay, and then this one. Do you see? The cells are really set apart. In other tissues, the cells didn't seem to have any kind of frame or distinct nature to them. Let's see more. This one. Look here, this part. Do you see? Okay, so what you're actually seeing has to do with the fact that this tissue is semi-solid. When you have a semi-solid tissue and a cell that is not solid, the cell needs a place to sit. Okay? And so what I want you to imagine is you take a semi-solid, like have you ever made Jell-O and like left it out for too long and it gets kind of springy? It's kind of like cartilage, okay? But before you left it out for too long, you actually had a grape in it, right, before it solidified. And then you pulled the grape out and there was still a place for the grape to sit. That's what you have with the cells. There's actually a little depression, a little hole in there. Or imagine taking an ice cream scoop and scooping out a little location. So all of them have that, which means that if you start looking, I mean, I'm not saying you're going to see it around every single cell, but if you take a slice of the tissue, you tend to get a bright space around the cell, and it's called the lacuna. And cartilage has it, and bone does too. It's a little harder to see in bone. So they're going to all have that in common. And then before we get into the specifics of cartilage, basically there's 3 types, and they're pretty easy to tell apart because one of them really doesn't have any really visible fibers in the matrix, okay? And it gets the word for glassy or clear, which is hyaline, and that's this one. One of them has elastic fibers running willy-nilly in the matrix, and it's called elastic cartilage, right? And one of them has collagen fibers running all parallel in the matrix, and it's called fibrocartilage. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, so basically you can start telling the 3 apart relatively easily with that as long as you've got a good slide, and sometimes you. So can you see that this is more likely to be elastic cartilage than either of the other 2? Because you can see visible fibers in the matrix. They're not parallel, and they are usually dark. They have fibrocartilage on it. I would never ask you this slide of fibrocartilage because you can see the suggestion they're all running parallel. So with these tissues, what we are going to do is look at sort of where they are and where they're found, and then the individual type of tissue. So I'm actually, no, I'll do it now. I'm going to do this again on the video, so you'll hear it twice if you listen to this video, just because the other class didn't get to this yet. Let's look at what you're going to run into with all cartilages. When you run into any cartilage, what you're going to see is, you're not here, are you, Miriam? Not here? Okay. With any cartilage, what you're going to have is, this is all matrix. And then you're going to have little holes in the matrix for cells to sit in. And then the cells are going to be in the holes. And so the cells are all called what? Chondrocytes. And then the space is called a what? Lacuna. Lacunae is plural. Okay. So chondrocytes and lacunae. Okay. They all have that in common. The other thing that all cartilage has in common is that it's all close to avascular. It does not have blood vessels running through the matrix, which is okay unless you damage it. And then that lack of good blood supply will give you some problems. Where it does have blood supply is from the outside in. So let me show you that. You don't have any of these pictures in your textbook, but look here. Here's a chunk of hyaline cartilage in the middle, and the tissue around it on the outside is called the perichondrium. We already talked about it. The perichondrium is not made of cartilage. It's made of dense, irregular connective tissue, and it's relatively vascular. So the blood supply comes from the outside in, which is okay until you get damaged and you have a need for a lot more nutrients. So one of the least likely tissues to repair in your body is cartilage because it's really thick and it's got blood supply only from the outside. It's not like an epithelial tissue that's microscopic with blood supply from the side. Okay? So you don't, if you ever had to choose between, for instance, damaging a bone, which is highly vascular, and damaging the cartilage, which is almost avascular, break the damn bone, but you never get to pick, right? It just like happens, right? Okay, so perichondrium is the place that you get the blood vessels. All right, so the hyaline cartilage, last one we'll do today. Hyaline cartilage is this guy right here. And the real characteristic of hyaline cartilage is that you don't see any distinctly visible fibers in the matrix, although, just so you know, there are fibers in the matrix. There have to be in order for this to be a structural tissue, right? And so there are collagen fibers in there, but you're not going to have to label them, and they don't stain with most of the staining techniques. So this is the one that looks smoothest in the matrix. This is also the most abundant cartilage in your body. If you want to feel hyaline cartilage, all you have to do is this. Where your nose stops being bone, that is hyaline cartilage, okay? The difference between that one and elastic cartilage is this versus this. Boing, 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 boing. Not this part. This part. That's elastic cartilage. You see the difference? Okay, so this is hyaline cartilage. Almost all the joints have hyaline cartilage at them, almost all of them. So between two bones, you've usually got hyaline cartilage. The trachea, the rings of the trachea are made of hyaline cartilage. That's all hyaline, as is most of your voice box is hyaline cartilage as well. And then your entire skeleton was mostly hyaline cartilage before it became bone. So the entire embryonic or fetal skeleton, or almost the entire embryonic or fetal skeleton, starts out as cartilage and then gets slowly replaced by bone during the development process. Okay, we're going to stop there for today. One last reminder, look on Saturday for a catch-up lecture, and then I will see you guys on Monday. I'll be here on Monday.
Are you only an assignment associated with Wednesdays?
Probably, yeah, just Wednesdays. And it won't be graded. It'll be just something to help you study and not busy work. Just something that I think will help you perform better.
Are the quizzes all pop quizzes or do you?
No, I'll tell you. You're having a quiz next Friday.